We are now at one of the more complex uh, parts of the teacher work sample called the analysis of student learning. And this is the section wherein you will be reporting the learning that your students have done in a very organized way, and you'll be getting some conclusions, drawing some conclusions about their learning and the effectiveness of your teaching. You may be asking yourself, why should we analyze learning? Well, actually, you probably are not asking yourself that, but here are some good reasons to add to your list. First, good teaching results in student learning. This is simple to think about, and it's really very intuitive to think about. Good teaching is going to result in good learning, but a lot of teachers get into the middle of learning situations with their students where their students really aren't doing very well, and they tend to get frustrated. They lose sight or they lose focus on what it is that they're actually trying to accomplish, and they forget that they really don't have data. They don't go back and review the data that they've collected, and they sort of spiral down into a sort of an achievement despair. The second reason is that there's accountability on you. It is a national trend that teachers are going to be held accountable for the achievement of their students. Typically, that is going to be measured via the standardized tests, nationally standardized tests. And it used to be that if everybody told you you were a good teacher and you felt pretty good about what you were doing, that was enough, and you were probably a good teacher. But now, that's not enough. Simply believing that you're a good teacher is not going to be enough of enough evidence to prove your worth, and that is something that teachers more and more are having to do in more and more formalized ways. And the third one is sort of related to that. It's professionalism. If you are a professional, you are going to be a combination of self-motivated and self-correcting, and you can't do that. You can't do either of those if you don't know where you need to be motivated and what things need to be corrected. Data helps you do that. So the point is that collection and use of data prepares you to answer the tough questions that are going to happen in your classroom. Look at these questions. These are pretty deep. How good are you as a teacher? What do you know about your students? What do your students know? What do they not know? And how can you work more effectively with individuals in your class? And then there's always the question that seems so innocuous to begin with, but really becomes a huge question if you can't answer it effectively for parents, and that is, how is my child doing? In the teacher work sample, data actually present themselves in a variety of different ways. In the contextual factors, you can see student instructional environment. That's information that we use. Learning goals, we have the state and local education association mandated content. In the assessment plan, we're trying to look at all of the developmental theories that apply to the students that we're teaching, and we try to come up with developmentally appropriate practice that combines the content and the contextual factors that we've found. The design for instruction includes provision of or for collection of the pre and post data, and it also combines the pre-data with the planning. So it's actually very important for us to be able to use that. Instructional decision making is a place where we reflect daily, perhaps more often than daily, and our reflections lead us to be able to make some observations about our teaching, the students' learning, and to sort of course correct in the middle of the process. Now, this section is going to focus on collection and organization of all of the assessment data that we use to evaluate teaching and learning. So this is going to be a section where our focus is on those 5 days and what we've done in the middle, but more importantly, we're going to look at the summative effect of those 5 days of instruction by looking at the data from the pre and the post test. And finally, we will evaluate ourselves. This is in the 7th section. Analysis requires a research mindset. And look at the things that really, if you look at these 4 sort of yellowish bullets, you see some things that really look like teachers should be. Observers, askers of questions, people who are willing to read what others have done and not just to stay within themselves, and people who are willing to try some new things. Now, when we pre-test, pre-testing is the first set of information. We gather our information prior to instruction about what the kids know. Now, we are going to set up our pre-test. Actually, by this time, you've already done that. Your pre-test is your post-test. Please note that the second small bullet down there where it says items should cover all the areas but needn't have the depth that a final exam or post-test would have. The reason for that statement is that the pre-test and the post-test are the same thing, and they are they reflect the same content. They reflect the same critical learning. It is reasonable that we would expect our students on the pre-test to do very poorly, and that on the post-test we would hope they would do much better. If one or two of the finer points, if several of the finer points of the instruction that just sort of happened during instruction and have been added in, if those things need to be added in order to be sure that the content that was taught is tested, that can be done to the final test, to the post-test. But changes to the post-test should be minimized as much as possible. As you look at this slide, post-testing happens after all of the instruction has been done. It should be reflective of the critical learning, and it needs to be authentic. That is, that it measures the content that was taught in the way that it was taught. So now we get to the heart of this section, the analysis of student learning. The standard, the teacher work sample standard, says the teacher uses assessment data to profile student learning and communicate information about student progress and achievement. Here are a couple of looks at some rubrics. Again, look only at the target. For the interpretation of data, we're looking for meaningful and appropriate interpretation that leads to some conclusions that are going to be helpful. And in the evidence of student or impact on student learning, we're looking for an analysis that includes evidence of the impact in terms of the number of students who achieved and the ones who didn't. But there's more to it than that. Here are the things we're going to be looking for in this process. First, you'll be presenting the overall information containing class averages for all the learning goals. And I will show you some graphs about, that present that. Then we're going to look at each learning goal. So we're looking at pre and post all learning goals as our first graph, and then some explanation about that. Then we'll ask you, or you will be asked, to present similar graphs for learning goals, and this is by learning goal. Isn't that nice and bright? There you go. Okay, use Excel to record the data from your pre and post tests. Please notice that here, learning goal, these numbers here, the 5s all the way across the top, and my data set, those 5s mean that there were 5 possible answers for each of those sections. So what I did was I had my learning goals were, or my pre-test and post-test were both same thing, five items for each of the learning goals. Now, if we look here, we'll see the pre-test scores for all the girls on each of the learning goals. And then we have their post-test scores. So on Learning Goal 1, Girl 1 got a 2. On Learning Goal 1, post-test, Girl 1 got a 4. Then we had a 5. Girl 1 did very well on Learning Goal 2, very well on Learning Goal 2. Notice that Learning Goal 2 was pretty high all the way down. That probably made a difference in the way that I planned. So the important thing to get here is that I have my pre-test and my post-test data broken down by learning goal with the students going down the side. And I have broken the students down by the 2 groups that I'm going to be comparing later on. I did that just because it was easier. It seemed like it would be easier to do that to start out with. You don't have to do that, but if you don't do it, you'll have to figure out a way to manipulate your data in Excel later on so that you can do the necessary calculations. Okay, remember, pre and post means before and after, and it is not intended to take the place of daily assessment. If everything in the pre and post process is converted to percentages, all your numbers will look alike, whether they are or not. Now, that's not to say that all of your numbers are going to be the same numbers. It's just that if you have, for instance, a student who gets, let's say that on Learning Goal 1, your pre-test and post-test have 10 items for Learning Goal 1, and the student gets 2 correct. And then on Learning Goal 2, you have 5 items, and the student gets 2 correct. Well, if we just look at the 2s that the student got, then we would say, well, they did about the same. But the fact is that the student who got 2 out of 10 got 20%. The student who got 2 out of 5 got 40%. Essentially got twice the achievement of the first student. So if you convert everything to percentages, it makes things nicer.